I thought I had seen it all, commanding the might of the Zorathian Imperial fleet, conquering worlds with ease. But Earth, a backwater planet barely out of the Stone Age. The Galactic Council tasked me with evaluating their military academy, and I was certain it would be a waste of time. That is, until I met Captain Mallory, a human who defied every expectation I had. She didn't just teach tactics, she broke every rule in the book, and when we clashed in a series of tactical simulations, I learned the most humbling lesson of my career. The humans didn't fight like anyone I had ever faced before, and I was about to lose more than just the simulation. So there I was, Commander Thex'val of the Zorathian Imperial Fleet, fourth in line to the Grand Marshal's seat, decorated veteran of 43 campaigns, being shuttled down to Earth, like some kind of glorified substitute teacher. The indignity of it all was, frankly, suffocating. My assignment? Evaluate the humans' so-called military academy. The Galactic Council, in their infinite wisdom, and I use that term loosely, very loosely, had decided that Earth's application to join the Interstellar Defense Coalition needed a thorough review. And who better to conduct such an evaluation than me? Nobody, obviously, though I would have preferred, I don't know, literally any other assignment in the known universe. Humans. Primitive, backwards, pink-skinned mammals who only discovered faster-than-light travel because they stumbled onto abandoned precursor technology like toddlers finding their parents' car keys. They had been spacefaring for what, 30 years? My family's military tradition went back 6,000 years. This was going to be a waste of time. As my shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere, honestly, the amount of nitrogen was ridiculous. Who designs a planet like this? I rehearsed my report in my head. Insufficient tactical doctrine, outdated strategic thinking, recommend remedial training under Zorathian supervision, period. Clean, simple, devastating. I would be back on my flagship by dinner. The landing pad came into view, and I prepared myself for the expected sight of whatever ramshackle structure humans called an academy. Probably repurposed agricultural buildings or something equally pathetic. Except it was not. The facility sprawling before me was, I must grudgingly admit, impressive. Towering structures of reinforced composites and crystallized metals. Wait, no, not crystallized, just very shiny, gleamed in the sunlight. Sensor arrays dotted the perimeter with a sophistication that made my secondary brain itch with annoyed recognition. Training fields stretched for kilometers dotted with equipment that looked, against all probability, cutting edge. I felt my first mandible twitch. The involuntary facial tic that my subordinates had learned meant someone was about to have a very bad day. So they had nice buildings. The Arbaxians had nice buildings too, and we conquered them in 48 hours. Architecture did not win wars. Doctrine did. Strategy did. Zorathian excellence did. I marched through the main entrance, my ceremonial armor clinking with each step, broadcasting my importance to anyone with functioning sensory organs. 2 human guards snapped to attention, acceptable, their posture was only slightly terrible, and directed me toward the academic wing. The hallways were clean, well lit, and filled with cadets of various species. I counted at least 7 different races among the students, all wearing the same bland gray uniforms. A Corthian nodded respectfully as I passed. A young Morellian actually saluted, which was more courtesy than I expected from humans' allies. Then I reached classroom 7B, and my mood somehow deteriorated further. The instructor was human, female, and she looked, for lack of a better term, completely unimpressed by my arrival. Captain Rebecca Mallory, according to the nameplate on her desk, stood at the front of the room with her arms crossed, watching me enter like I was a mildly interesting insect. She was perhaps in her 4th decade of life, practically ancient by human standards, surely past her prime. Her hair was pulled back in a severe style that seemed designed to punish her own scalp. Her uniform was immaculate, but bore none of the decorative flair that marked true military achievement. A female instructor, teaching military theory to officer candidates. Oh, this was going to be even easier than I thought. Human gender dynamics were well documented in our intelligence files. Females of their species were typically assigned support roles, administrative positions, medical duties. Seeing one in an actual command training position was, well, it was almost adorable. Like watching a juvenile trying to operate heavy machinery. I drew myself up to my full height, the impressive 2.3 meters, and allowed my chest plates to flare slightly. Dominance display. Standard protocol. Captain Mallory, I presume, I announced, my voice resonating with the harmonic depth that made most species instinctively defer. I am Commander Thex'val, here to observe your instructional methods on behalf of the Galactic Council. I trust you have been informed of my purpose. She looked at me for exactly 2 seconds longer than was comfortable, then turned back to her desk. Yeah, I got the memo, she said, her tone flatter than a tactical simulation grid. Grab a seat in the back. Try not to interrupt. We're in the middle of something. Try not to interrupt? Try not to interrupt? I was a commander of the Zorathian Imperial Fleet. I had commanded battle groups. I had sieged fortified positions. I had personally accepted the surrender of 3 planetary governors. And this human female with her bland uniform and her aggressively unimpressed demeanor was telling me to sit quietly like some first-cycle cadet. But fine. I would sit. I would observe. I would document every inadequacy, every tactical misunderstanding, every primitive assumption that these humans called education. My report would be so scathing that Earth's application would be rejected for the next century. I settled into a seat clearly designed for smaller species, my armor scraping against the undersized frame, and glared at the back of Captain Mallory's head. She did not even turn around. The other students, a mix of humans, 2 Corthians, a Viridian, and what looked like a juvenile Pranix, watched this exchange with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed amusement. Oh, you want to see something amusing? Just wait until I systematically dismantle whatever passes for military education in this primitive facility. Captain Mallory tapped her display screen, and a holographic battlefield materialized above her desk. All right, people, she said, still not acknowledging me. Before we were so ceremoniously interrupted, we were discussing the Krevlor offensive of 2247. Who can tell me what the attacking force's primary mistake was? This was going to be a long day, and I was absolutely going to enjoy every second of destroying her credibility. I lasted approximately 7 minutes before my patience evaporated like water on a plasma coil. Captain Mallory was explaining incorrectly, I might add, the tactical breakdown of some obscure historical conflict when I could no longer contain myself. The sheer audacity of listening to a human lecture about military strategy when my people had been perfecting warfare since before their ancestors discovered fire was simply too much. I stood, my chair scraping loudly against the floor, armor clanking with authoritative finality. I must interrupt, I announced, projecting my voice across the classroom with the kind of commanding presence that made junior officers stand straighter. This entire discussion is predicated on a fundamentally flawed understanding of military doctrine. Every head in the room turned toward me. The students looked startled. One of the Corthians looked downright panicked, probably recognizing my rank insignia and understanding exactly how much trouble interrupting a Zorathian commander usually bought you. Captain Mallory, however, simply raised one eyebrow. Just one. The other remained exactly where it was, as if the upper half of her face could not even be bothered to fully express surprise. Is that so? She said. Not a question. A statement. Flat as a bulkhead. It is indeed so, I continued. Warming to my theme, I activated my personal holo projector and the pride of the Zorathian Empire materialized above my palm. Our flag, magnificent in its complexity, rotated slowly in the air. Crimson and gold geometric patterns interwoven with the 17 seals of conquest, each representing a subjugated system. This is the banner of the Zorathian Imperial Fleet. Do you know what it represents? Overcompensation, one of the human students muttered. Several others tried unsuccessfully to hide their snickers. I ignored them. Juveniles lacked the perspective to recognize greatness. Victory, I declared. 47 consecutive military victories across 4 sectors of the galaxy. 47 campaigns without a single strategic defeat. Our military doctrine is studied in every major academy in the known galaxy. Our tactical innovations have shaped modern warfare, and our officers are considered the gold standard of command competence. I let that sink in, expanding the hologram, so the flag filled a quarter of the room. Impressive, undeniable, irrefutable. Captain Mallory looked at the flag, then at me, then back at the flag. Her expression had not changed, Still that same flat, unimpressed look, like I had just shown her a particularly uninteresting sandwich. "How many of those were against equals?" she asked. The question hit me like a misaligned gravity field. What, excuse me?" "Equals," she repeated, enunciating each syllable with the kind of patience usually reserved for explaining things to the particularly slow. "How many of those 47 victories were against opponents with equivalent technology, equivalent training, and equivalent resources? You know, actual peer competitors, not just whoever you outgunned by a factor of 10. My mandibles clicked involuntarily. The nature of our opponents is irrelevant. Victory is victory. Military superiority is demonstrated through consistent success regardless of— "So none of them," she interrupted. "Got it." The Viridian student made a noise that might have been a cough, or might have been a strangled laugh. I chose to believe it was a cough, because the alternative was unacceptable. I did not travel 14 light-years to be lectured about military history by someone whose species only recently figured out which end of a plasma rifle produces the dangerous part, I said, my voice dropping into the low-frequency range that typically preceded formal challenges. "Your entire military tradition spans mere decades. Ours spans millennia. Perhaps, Captain, your time would be better spent learning from actual military professionals rather than pretending to be one." The room went silent. Properly silent this time. Even the juvenile Pranic stopped fidgeting. Captain Mallory set down her stylus very carefully, very deliberately, on her desk. Then she walked around to the front, leaned back against it, and crossed her arms again. "Okay," she said. "Let's make this interesting." Oh no, that tone. I recognized that tone. It was the same tone my tactical instructor had used right before he made me run combat simulations for 17 straight hours to teach me about hubris. "I propose a deal," she continued. "You and me. Tactical simulation competition. 3 scenarios. Best 2 out of 3 wins." "What are the terms?" I asked, suddenly wary but unable to back down in front of an audience. "If you win," she said, "you get to write Earth's military curriculum yourself. Every word, every tactical doctrine, every strategic principle. You can shape our entire military education however you see fit, and I will personally recommend your methods to the Galactic Council." My secondary brain perked up. That was exactly what I wanted. Complete control over human military development, ensuring it aligned with proper Zorathian principles. It would be a triumph, a coup, a legacy-defining achievement. "And if you win?" I asked, though the possibility seemed laughably remote. Her smile was thin, sharp, and absolutely devoid of warmth. "You admit, on official record in writing with your full rank and title attached, that humans are not primitive, and that our military contributions are valid and valuable to the Interstellar Defense Coalition. That is all. That's all." I almost laughed. She wanted me to write some meaningless bureaucratic statement. That was her grand ambition. I could write that in my sleep, not that I would ever need to, because there was absolutely zero probability of me losing a tactical simulation to a human instructor who probably learned strategy from children's entertainment programs. "I accept your terms," I said formally, drawing myself up to full height again. "Prepare your scenarios, Captain. I will demonstrate what actual military excellence looks like." "Great," she said, that same flat tone never wavering. "We start in 5 minutes. Everyone else, you're about to get a live demonstration of applied tactics. Take notes. There will be a test." As the students scrambled to set up the simulation bay, I caught Captain Mallory looking at me one more time. Still that same expression. Still completely unimpressed. Well, that was about to change. The simulation bay hummed to life, holographic projectors creating a 3-dimensional battlefield that filled the center of the room. Standard naval engagement scenario. Open space, minimal asteroid cover. 2 fleets of equal tonnage starting at maximum sensor range. Perfect. This was my specialty. Fleet tactics were literally in my genetic coding at this point. I took my position at the command console, fingers dancing across the interface with practiced ease. My fleet materialized in the tactical display, 27 ships arranged in textbook Zorathian formation, heavy cruisers in the center, destroyers flanking, frigates screening, and my dreadnought positioned for maximum fire support coordination. The hammer and anvil, a formation so elegant, so proven, so absolutely perfect that it had been used successfully for 3,000 years. We taught this to first cycle cadets. It was basic, fundamental, unbeatable when executed properly. And I always executed properly. Across the simulated battlefield, Captain Mallory's fleet appeared. Same ship composition, same tonnage, same starting conditions. Fair fight, at least on paper. I watched her deployment with the kind of smug satisfaction usually reserved for watching inferior species discover they had severely miscalculated. She was splitting her fleet into tiny groups, 3 ships here, 4 ships there, 2 ships way off on the flank, nothing resembling a coherent battle line whatsoever. It looked like someone had taken a proper fleet formation and thrown it into a blender. My primary brain was already writing the post-simulation analysis. Subject demonstrates fundamental lack of understanding regarding concentration of force, failure to maintain formation integrity, tactical decisions consistent with untrained civilian rather than military professional, etc., etc. This was going to be over in minutes. Simulation start. The computer announced in its bland, neutral tone. I advanced my fleet in perfect formation, maintaining spacing, keeping my screening elements forward, my heavy hitters protected but positioned for optimal firing solutions. Beautiful. Textbook. Exactly as it should be. Captain Mallory's scattered groups darted forward, moving fast, way too fast, burning fuel like they had infinite reserves and absolutely no understanding of sustained operations. I prepared to engage the first group. 3 destroyers coming in hot on my right flank. My frigates moved to intercept, weapons charging, targeting solutions locked. The destroyers did not slow down. They did not attempt to maneuver into firing position. They just kept coming, accelerating, pointing directly at my frigates like missiles with delusions of grandeur. "What in the name of the 17 SEALs?" I muttered. The first destroyer slammed into my lead frigate at a relative velocity that made my secondary brain hurt just calculating it. Both ships exploded in a brilliant flash of simulated plasma. The shockwave caught my second frigate, crumpling its port side like cheap hull plating. Collision protocols should have. I started to shout, but then another group of human ships plowed into my left flank, deliberately ramming my destroyers with the kind of reckless abandon usually associated with catastrophic navigation failures, not tactical decisions. "What kind of lunatic tactics are these?" I bellowed, watching my beautiful formation disintegrate under a wave of suicidal human vessels that apparently thought they were expendable ammunition. My heavy cruisers tried to adjust, bringing their main batteries to bear, but the human ships were too close, too fast, weaving between my formations like demented insects, and every single one that got close enough just rammed my vessels at full thrust. It was chaos. Absolute, unmitigated chaos. Ships exploding, formations breaking, my carefully orchestrated hammer and anvil turning into a confused melee where half my fleet was trying to avoid being used as target practice for human battering rams. This is not, you cannot just, I sputtered, my mandibles clicking so rapidly they made an audible rattling sound. The simulation ended with 63% of my fleet destroyed or disabled. Captain Mallory's fleet had lost 70% of its ships, but the remaining vessels had complete battlefield control, and my shattered formations were in full retreat. Defeat flashed across the tactical display in letters that seemed specifically designed to mock me. I stared at the screen, my primary and secondary brains both struggling to process what had just happened. That was not warfare. That was vandalism. That was unconventional warfare does not count, I announced, my voice slightly higher pitched than I intended. Ramming it is not a legitimate tactical doctrine. It is a desperation move, a last resort, not a primary strategy. This is unconventional, Captain Mallory interrupted, and for the first time since I arrived, she actually smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the kind of smile that apex predators probably wore right before they explained to prey exactly how the food chain worked. She walked over to the tactical display and highlighted one of her destroyed destroyers. "Honey, we invented torpedoes after watching fish swim. You know what a torpedo is. It is a self-propelled explosive that rams into enemy ships. We just cut out the middleman and strapped engines to the whole damn ship. That is insane." I managed. "Sure," she agreed cheerfully. "We also invented war crimes before we invented the wheel. You should see what we did with pointed sticks and bad attitudes. Spoiler alert, it was not pretty, and it definitely was not conventional. The students were frantically taking notes. One of the humans was grinning like this was the best entertainment they had seen all year. The Corthians looked horrified. The Viridian appeared to be having an existential crisis. I felt my chest plates tighten, a physiological stress response that I had not experienced since my academy days. That was one scenario, I said stiffly. Hardly representative of overall tactical competence. The next simulation will demonstrate proper military. 5-minute break, Captain Mallory announced to the class. Hydrate, stretch, and place your bets on how the next round goes. Yow. Betting pool is in the usual place. There was a betting pool. On my performance, these students were gambling on whether I would lose again. I was definitely writing a very strongly worded report about this entire facility. Just as soon as I won the next 2 simulations, which I absolutely would. Probably. Maybe. Oh no. Different scenario, I demanded. Probably louder than necessary. Naval tactics they are not my primary specialization. Ground combat. Urban environment. That is where true tactical skill is demonstrated. That was a lie. Naval tactics were absolutely one of my specializations, but urban warfare was where I truly excelled. I had personally led pacification operations in 14 metropolitan centers. I knew every doctrine, every approach, every textbook solution to city fighting. Captain Mallory shrugged. Your funeral. Computer load urban assault scenario Bravo 7. The holographic display shifted, and suddenly we were looking at a mid-sized city, approximately 200,000 simulated inhabitants, mixture of commercial and residential zones, decent infrastructure, multiple approach vectors. My forces would be attacking, hers defending. Perfect. The attacker always had the advantage in simulations, because defensive positions were predictable. I deployed my forces with the kind of precision that would make my instructors weep with pride. Elite Zorathian shock troops, full-powered armor, integrated communications, squad-level tactical coordination that bordered on telepathic. I organized them into 3 spearhead formations, each supported by armored vehicles and drone reconnaissance. We would punch through her defensive lines, secure the central district, establish control points, and systematically clear resistance. Clean, efficient, professional. Captain Mallory's defending forces appeared on the tactical display, and I actually laughed. They were scattered throughout the city with no apparent organization, no fallback positions, no coordination whatsoever. Some units were in buildings, some were in the streets, some appeared to be in the commercial district shopping for groceries for all the tactical sense their positioning made. Your defensive deployment is severely flawed, I observed, feeling generous enough to offer constructive criticism before I crushed her forces. You have no concentrated strong points, no interlocking fields of fire, no. Yeah, she waved a hand dismissively. Just start the simulation already. Fine. Her loss. Literally. Simulation start. My first spearhead advanced into the northern district, sensors sweeping, drones providing overhead reconnaissance. Every trooper maintaining proper spacing and tactical awareness. We moved through the streets like a well-oiled machine, because that is exactly what we were. The first 3 blocks were clear, too clear, suspiciously clear. Maintain vigilance. I ordered my simulated forces, enemy contact imminent. My lead squad approached an intersection, and that is when everything went sideways. A manhole cover exploded upward, and 3 human soldiers erupted from the sewer system like some kind of nightmare emerging from the underworld, firing as they came. My lead trooper went down. The humans disappeared back into the sewers before my squad could return fire. Contact from below, my squad leader reported. But then gunfire erupted from a 3rd-story window, except when my troops returned fire and breached the building. There was nobody there, just a remotely operated weapon mount, and what appeared to be a recording device playing mocking laughter. Another squad reported contact from a garbage dumpster. 2 human soldiers had been hiding inside a garbage dumpster, and had opened fire at point-blank range before disappearing into a connected tunnel system that should not have existed but apparently did. They are in the sewers, I ordered. Flush them out. Standard underground clearance protocols. But they were not just in the sewers. They were in the buildings. They were on the rooftops. They were underground in maintenance tunnels. One of my troopers reported taking fire from what he thought was a corpse but turned out to be a human soldier covered in debris playing dead. My eastern spearhead encountered a soldier who had literally painted himself to match a mailbox and had been standing motionless on a street corner for the entire approach. A mailbox. He had disguised himself as street furniture, and when my troops walked past, he shot 4 of them in the back before vanishing into a building that turned out to be connected to 7 other buildings through holes knocked in the walls. What? How is there hiding everywhere? I sputtered, watching my tactical display turn into a nightmare of red casualty markers. This is not, you cannot just hiding in garbage, hiding in the trash. That is not military tactics. That is strategic repositioning, Captain Mallory supplied helpfully, watching my formations disintegrate with the same calm expression she had maintained throughout this entire humiliating experience. It is garbage, I shouted. You call it trash, she said, examining her fingernails like this was all mildly boring. I call it Tuesday. Also, concealment, cover, improvised fighting positions, tactical flexibility, and making the enemy really uncomfortable about checking their mail. Multi-purpose, really. My southern spearhead had completely stalled after discovering that an entire city block had been rigged with improvised traps, and that the humans were using the defenders' knowledge of local terrain to turn every street corner into an ambush point. My western force was taking casualties from sniper fire originating from positions my drones had already marked as clear. The humans were not fighting like a military force. They were fighting like criminals, like insurgents. Like every rule of conventional warfare had been thrown out a window, which they were probably also hiding behind to shoot at my troops. Simulation ended. 78% casualties on my side. The humans had lost 60% of their forces, but they still held the city center, and my remaining troops were scattered, demoralized, and probably suffering from psychological trauma that would require extensive simulated therapy. Defeat flashed again, somehow even more mockingly than before. I was sweating. Actual moisture was condensing on my carapace plates. Zorathians did not sweat easily. It required significant physiological stress. I was experiencing significant physiological stress. Those were not legitimate military tactics, I said weakly, knowing even as I said it how pathetic it sounded. Really? Captain Mallory asked, and this time her smile was absolutely vicious. Funny because we have been using them for approximately 10,000 years. You know what we call it when you fight fair. Losing. You know what we call it when you hide in trash and win. Winning. The Viridian student raised a tentacle. Question. Are humans okay, psychologically speaking, as a species? No, Captain Mallory said cheerfully. Next question. I stared at the tactical display, at the scattered red markers representing my elite shock troops, defeated by soldiers hiding in mailboxes and garbage bins and sewers. We were tied 1-1. Everything came down to the final simulation, and for the first time since arriving on this ridiculous planet, I was genuinely uncertain about the outcome. My secondary brain suggested this might be a good time to start composing a graceful concession statement. I told my secondary brain to shut up. The 5-minute break between simulations felt more like 5 hours. I stood there, my armor suddenly feeling too tight, my respiratory systems working harder than they should, trying to process how I had lost 2 simulations to a species that had been in space for less time than I had been alive. No, this was unacceptable. I was a commander of the Zorathian Imperial Fleet. I did not lose to humans. I especially did not lose to humans who hid in mailboxes like some kind of deranged street decoration. I needed to reassert dominance. Establish hierarchy, remind everyone in this room exactly who they were dealing with. I reached into my equipment case and pulled out my flag, the full ceremonial version, not the holographic projection, real fabric, woven with metallic threads that caught the light, the 17 seals of conquest embroidered with precision that took artisans months to complete. This was not just a flag, this was a symbol of millennia of military supremacy. I walked to the front of the classroom, my armor clinking with each step, and planted the flag directly in the center of Captain Mallory's desk. The magnetic base locked into place with a satisfying click. Before we continue, I announced, projecting my voice with every ounce of authority I could muster. I believe it is important that everyone in this room understand what they are witnessing. This flag represents the Zorathian Empire, the single most successful military power in galactic history. 47 consecutive victories. 6,000 years of unbroken tactical excellence. When this banner is displayed, it is a reminder that some species have earned their place in the hierarchy of civilization through demonstrated superiority. The classroom had gone very quiet. The students looked uncomfortable. One of the Corthians had that expression that meant they were calculating the fastest route to the nearest exit. The humans were exchanging glances that I could not quite interpret. Captain Mallory had been sitting on the edge of a desk at the back of the room, but now she stood and walked forward slowly, deliberately, each footstep echoing in the silence. She stopped in front of her desk and looked at the flag for a long moment, head tilted slightly, like she was examining a particularly interesting technical problem. Then she picked it up. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. She examined the flag from multiple angles, running her fingers over the embroidered seals, testing the fabric's weight, looking at it with the kind of clinical detachment usually reserved for laboratory specimens. She said finally. Nice stitching. Then she walked over to the metal waste bin in the corner of the room and dropped the flag inside. Captain Mallory, what are you? I started, but she held up one hand, silencing me with a gesture that probably should not have worked but somehow absolutely did. She reached into her pocket and pulled out something small and metallic. It took me a moment to recognize it. An ancient earth lighter, the kind that used actual combustible fuel and created actual fire. Who even carried those anymore? I am going to teach you kids about something we call symbolism, she said to the class, not looking at me, her tone conversational like she was about to explain basic mathematics. She flicked the lighter. A small flame appeared, dancing in the air, producing actual heat and light through chemical combustion like some kind of primitive technology museum exhibit. Then she dropped it into the waste bin. The flag caught immediately, the metallic threads accelerating the burn, flames spreading across the fabric with enthusiastic speed. The 17 seals of conquest curled and blackened, the crimson and gold colors dissolving into ash and smoke. My brain, both of them, completely stopped functioning. What are you doing? I shrieked, rushing forward, my voice climbing octaves I did not know I could reach. That is a symbol of the Zorathian Empire. You cannot just. That is destruction of military regalia. That is disrespect of the highest order. That is practically a war crime. You are burning my flag. Weird, Captain Mallory observed, watching the flames with that same calm expression, like she was commenting on mildly interesting weather. It burns just like any other piece of cloth, almost like fabric does not care about your ego. The flag was now fully engulfed, smoke rising toward the ventilation system, the smell of burning synthetic materials filling the room. The last of the 17 seals blackened and crumbled, becoming indistinguishable from any other ash. You burned. I could barely form words. My mandibles were clicking so rapidly they sounded like malfunctioning machinery. Do you have any idea what you have just done? The diplomatic incident you have just created. I will report this. You will be court-martialed. You will be expelled. The Galactic Council will. Will what? She interrupted, finally turning to look at me directly. Get upset about fabric? It is a piece of cloth, Commander. Fancy cloth, sure. Expensive cloth, probably. But still just cloth. You are standing here having a complete meltdown because I burned some fabric. The class was dead silent now. Several students had their mouths hanging open. One of the humans was clearly trying not to laugh and failing miserably, making small choking sounds. The juvenile pranics looked like they were watching a traffic accident, horrified but unable to look away. It represents, I started. It represents whatever power you give it, she cut me off again. And I just demonstrated that I give it exactly 0 power. Because you know what? Symbols only work if people agree to be impressed by them. And I am not impressed. She nudged the waste bin with her boot. The flames were already dying down, leaving nothing but ash and the faint smell of disappointed imperialism. That was. I struggled to find words adequate to express the magnitude of what had just occurred. That was the most disrespectful, most disgraceful, 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 most deplied. Yeah, probably, she agreed easily. But you know what it was not? Ineffective. You came in here waving that flag around like it meant something, like it gave you authority, like we were supposed to be automatically impressed because your people won some fights against whoever was unlucky enough to be in your way. Well, congratulations, Commander. Your fancy flag is now carbon particulates in my air filtration system. The room erupted in a mixture of gasps and barely suppressed laughter. One student actually applauded before catching themselves. I stood there, staring at the waste bin, at the ashes of my flag, at this human woman who had just committed what was probably 17 different violations of interstellar protocol, and realized with horrible clarity that I had absolutely no idea how to respond. My flag was gone. And somehow, that made everything worse. You will be court-martialed, I declared, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and something uncomfortably close to hysteria. You will be expelled from this academy. You will be imprisoned for destruction of diplomatic property. You will be— Court-martial me? Captain Mallory interrupted, and she actually laughed. Like I had just told the funniest joke she had heard all year. Buddy, I am teaching these kids the most important military lesson they will ever learn, and you are too busy having a tantrum about fancy fabric to realize it. The most important you burned. Symbols only have power if you give them power, she said, her voice cutting through my sputtering with the precision of a plasma cutter through hull plating. She gestured at the waste bin at the ashes. That flag, you spent 6,000 years making everyone afraid of it. And you know what happened? Your empire conquered 47 species because they were too afraid of that flag to fight smart. They saw your banner, they saw your fancy armor, they saw your traditions and your ceremonies, and they folded before the fight even started. She walked back to her desk, leaned against it, crossed her arms. Humans do not worship symbols, Commander. We worship results. You can burn our flags, you can mock our traditions, you can insult our honor, and you know what we will do. We will hide in mailboxes and shoot you when you walk past. Because winning is not about who has the fanciest flag. It is about who is still standing when the smoke clears. The students were absolutely riveted. The Viridian was taking notes so frantically their manipulator appendages were blurring. One of the Corthians nodded slowly, like something fundamental had just clicked into place in their understanding. I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. My primary brain was attempting to formulate a devastating rebuttal. My secondary brain had apparently given up, and was wondering if there were any openings in remote surveying positions far from Earth. One more simulation. I finally managed, grasping at the last shred of dignity I had left. One final scenario. And I get to design it. Completely. Any parameters I want. Captain Mallory shrugged. Sure. Your funeral. Again. I practically threw myself at the simulation console, fingers moving faster than thought, building the most impossible scenario I could conceive. Human defending forces outnumbered 10 to 1, no air support, no orbital assets, limited ammunition, aging equipment, minimal fortifications. My attacking forces would have every advantage, every resource, every possible edge. This, I announced with grim satisfaction, is a scenario with no possible victory condition for the defending force. This is mathematics. This is inevitability. This is— Just started already, Captain Mallory said, examining her fingernails again. Simulation start. My forces advanced, a massive overwhelming tide of military power, perfectly coordinated, properly equipped, numerically superior in every measurable way. This was not a battle. This was a demonstration of what happened when you fought against impossible odds. The human forces held position for exactly 47 seconds. Then they surrendered. All of them. White flags appearing across the entire defensive line. Weapons lowered, hands raised in universal gesture of capitulation. I blinked, then blinked again. Then checked the simulation parameters to make sure something had not glitched. No glitch, they had just surrendered. Given up. Admitted defeat before the actual fighting even started. Ha! I shouted. Probably louder than the situation warranted, but I did not care. Surrender. They surrendered. Did you see that? Total capitulation. Finally, a demonstration of proper understanding of tactical. Keep watching, Captain Mallory said quietly. My forces processed the surrendered humans according to standard protocols, disarming them, organizing them into holding areas, integrating some into labor details because why waste resources? Wait. The first supply depot reported contaminated rations. Chemical analysis indicated deliberate poisoning. But how? The supplies were secure. Unless someone had access. Someone working in the depot. Someone like a surrendered human assigned to labor details. Oh no. Then communication equipment started malfunctioning. Subtle errors, incorrect intelligence reports, misdirected orders. My command structure was receiving conflicting information. Units moving to wrong positions because someone somehow was feeding false data into the system from the inside. A fight broke out between two of my squads over resources. Both claimed the other had stolen equipment. Both were absolutely convinced. Both had evidence that should not exist unless someone had planted it. My troops were turning on each other, paranoia spreading like infectious disease. What is? How are they? I stared at the tactical display in growing horror. The surrendered humans had not been defeated. They had infiltrated every single one placed strategically within my forces. Each one sabotaging, misleading, poisoning, manipulating. They were destroying my army from the inside, while my troops were busy suspecting each other. Then, in the midst of the chaos, the humans escaped. All of them, simultaneously. Coordinated breakout across every holding facility, and my forces were too busy fighting amongst themselves to stop them. The escaped humans regrouped outside my fractured perimeter, reacquired weapons from hidden caches I had never detected, and attacked. My army, outnumbering them 10-1, technologically superior, properly equipped, collapsed like a house made of propaganda. Units could not coordinate because they did not trust their orders. Supplies were compromised. Equipment was sabotaged. Command structure was shattered. Total annihilation. Defeat flashed on the screen one final time, but this time it felt less like an announcement and more like a eulogy. I stood there, staring at the tactical display, at the complete destruction of my simulated forces, unable to process what had just happened. They surrendered, I said weakly, my voice barely above a whisper. They surrendered and still won. Yeah, Captain Mallory agreed. Funny how that works. You know what we learned a long time ago, Commander? Pride is expensive. Results are cheap, and sometimes the best way to win is to convince your enemy they have already won, then burn their victory down around them. The classroom was silent except for the quiet hum of the simulation bay powering down. I had lost 3 simulations, 3 complete, total, undeniable defeats. And somehow the worst part was not the losing. It was the slowly dawning realization that I had never actually been winning in the first place. The classroom remained silent. Everyone watched me, waiting for my reaction, probably expecting another outburst, another desperate attempt to salvage my dignity from the smoldering wreckage of this entire catastrophic day. I had nothing left. My arguments were ash, like my flag. My pride was buried under 3 simulation defeats, and one very pointed lesson about the difference between ceremony and capability. Captain Mallory pushed off from her desk and walked to the center of the room, hands in her pockets, completely relaxed, like she had not just systematically dismantled everything I thought I understood about warfare. We learned a long time ago that pride is expensive, Commander, she said, her voice losing some of that sardonic edge, becoming almost conversational. Results are cheap. You know how many wars humans have lost? More than your species has probably fought. We have been conquered, occupied, defeated, scattered, and broken more times than I can count on both hands and several feet. She gestured vaguely at the simulation display, still showing the wreckage of my final defeat. But we learned from every single one. Every loss taught us something. Every defeat showed us a new way to fight, a new way to survive, a new trick to pull when conventional warfare failed. Your flag means you have won 47 times. Our burned flag means we got back up 48. I found my voice, though it came out smaller than I intended. Why did you really burn my flag? She looked at me for a long moment, and for the first time her expression softened slightly. Not much, but enough that I could see something other than professional antagonism. Because you needed to learn it was just fabric, Commander, she said quietly. You walked in here wrapped in tradition and ceremony, and 6,000 years of unbroken victories, and you thought that meant something. But leadership is not about flags. It is not about how many battles you have won, or how impressive your armor looks, or how many seals you have embroidered on a piece of cloth. Leadership is about bringing your people home. Everything else is just decoration. The weight of those words settled over the classroom like gravity suddenly doubling. I straightened my armor, what little dignity I could muster, forcing my posture into something approximating professional bearing. According to the terms of our agreement, I am required to make an official statement. Yep, she confirmed. I activated my personal recorder, took a breath that my respiratory systems really did not want to cooperate with, and spoke for the record. I, Commander Thex'val of the Zorathian Imperial Fleet, after thorough evaluation and direct tactical assessment, do hereby acknowledge that human military theorists demonstrate adequate strategic thinking and tactical flexibility worthy of consideration by the Interstellar Defense Coalition. Adequate. That was the best my pride would allow. Not exceptional, not impressive, just adequate. Captain Mallory grinned, and this time it was almost friendly. Almost. I will take adequate, she said. Adequate kept us alive when superior species tried to wipe us out. Adequate let us survive when everyone said we could not. Superior got your people overconfident. Adequate made us dangerous. She walked back to her desk, rummaged in a drawer, and pulled out a small flag. Earth's flag, blue and green and white, tiny enough to fit in the palm of her hand. She walked over and handed it to me. Keep it, she said. When you finally lose a war, you will understand why we are dangerous, not because we win pretty, because we lose ugly and come back meaner. I took the flag, holding it carefully, like it might explode or transform into something else, or teach me another humiliating lesson I was not prepared for. Permission to leave, I managed. Granted. Have a safe trip home, Commander. I walked to the door, my armor feeling heavier than it had when I arrived. My certainty about the universe significantly lighter. As I reached the threshold, I heard one of the human students speak up. Captain Mallory, did you really just commit an interstellar incident by burning a Zorathian flag? I paused, curious, despite myself about how she would answer. Kids, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. If burning a flag is your biggest diplomatic crisis, your diplomacy was already dead. Now sit down. Because I am about to tell you the story of how we tricked an entire invasion force with fake radio signals and a guy named Dave. The class erupted in laughter and excited chatter as I stepped into the hallway. I looked down at the tiny Earth flag in my hand, then carefully, almost reverently, placed it in my equipment case next to the empty space where my own flag used to be. My shuttle ride back to orbit was very quiet. I spent most of it staring out the window, thinking about flags and fabric and the difference between symbols and substance. My report to the Galactic Council would be complicated. But as I prepared my official documentation, I found myself including one additional note, off the record, in my personal log: recommendation: approach human military integration with caution. Not because they are incompetent, but because they are competent in ways we do not have doctrines for. They do not fight to preserve pride. They fight to win. This makes them considerably more dangerous than their technology suggests. I paused, then added one final line. Also, never, under any circumstances, question their instructor's methods in front of a class. You will lose. You will deserve to lose, and they will probably set something on fire to prove a point. I transmitted the report, leaned back in my seat, and allowed myself the smallest, most grudging smile. Adequate, she had said. Adequate was terrifying. An Earth's application to the Interstellar Defense Coalition. I found myself writing a recommendation for approval, with extensive footnotes about unconventional warfare training requirements for Allied forces. Because if we were going to work alongside humans, everyone needed to learn the same lesson I just had. Check your mailboxes, watch your trash bins, question your surrenders, and never ever assume that fabric means anything more than the person willing to burn it.